Good to go. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Nerd and Out Sports. It's Robin Donald, and Giants news is everywhere. The New York Football Giants have fired Joe Judge. It's over. Um, we have got a new GM search going on right now, but the big news, obviously, Joe Judge is gone. A change that had to be made. And Donald, how you feeling?
Not much has happened this week, right? Pretty quiet week, just another run in the middle week. No, that was wow. I mean, what a crazy couple of days. I mean, obviously Sunday was mortally embarrassing, and then we went into Black Monday, and then we kind of heard kind of rumors. We didn't know what was going to happen. We kind of heard Justina Anderson say that Joe Judge was going to stay, and then there was a big backlash, and a lot of fans were upset, rightfully so. But one thing was quite obvious was, and the email that the Giants sent out to the season ticket holders, Joe Judge's name was not mentioned, right? So that made it clear that his position was certainly under threat, or certainly under consideration. And then they had these meetings, and it was going on. It wasn't just that. It wasn't just Monday. It went into Tuesday, and I was thinking, you know, if they kept him, it would be impossible. His position would be untenable because they've already put his feet over the fire, right? So you can't really then lumber him with a GM fully knowing that his position was under threat. So they were clearly not all in on him going into these meetings, and it became the point where it had to happen. There was no other option. Joe Judge fired himself. I mean, what do you think, Rob, of Joe Judge's actions over the last few weeks?
He cost himself the job. All the reports from respectable people, Schefter, Rappaport, Jay Glazer, I mean, everybody you could think of was pretty much giving him the job next year. They're building around Joe Judge. The Giants are moving forward with the idea that Joe Judge is the guy. And he had the job locked up for next year, at the very least. And he went on that 11-minute rant where he pleaded his case, which we talked about already. And then they completely gave up in a meaningless game to end the season. They showed no fight. And, all he had to do was keep his mouth shut. It's all he had to do. Just say, look, we're not happy with the product. We're going to do everything we can. It's a very robotic Joe Judge answer, but we're going to do everything we can to make it better. And he would have been the head coach next year. He talked his way out of a job, and you almost come to expect it with the way this organization has been over the last decade or so. And I think John Mara was forced into doing this by the fans. I think we really had a voice here because if not for what they were saying to him during the game when he was on the field pregame, and the fact that there was nobody there, and the mock cheers for the first downs and the first touchdown we've had from a receiver since October, which is just disgusting. I definitely believe that we had a say, and we had something to do with the Giants saying enough is enough. We have to make changes here. And the thing is, I was somewhat on board had we kept Judge and just said, give it one more year. We're going to have him work with Abrams. I'm like, it's better than half-assing it and going with a new GM from outside and keeping Judge, because that limits your options. If you keep Judge, you're not going to get your chance at all these up-and-coming personnel guys. So I was on board to a degree with them just being like Abrams and Judge for 1 year, see what happens, and maybe they can fix it. But everybody knew the right choice was start over. Gettleman retired. Judge had to go. Clean slate. Everybody's got to go. And I'm glad to see that they're actually doing it. To a point, I still think Mara's going to have his family involved, which is annoying. But if what they said is true, how they're going to let the GM pick his guys no matter in every single position, it's going to be his decision, then I'm finally, for the first time in a while, excited that John Mara is kind of stepping back and saying, you do it. It's on you now. And that's what we want. We want Mara out of the decision making here. He's going to hire the GM, but once that guy's hired, the GM's got to make those next decisions. That's what I want. And so far, so good. Step one complete.
Yeah. John Mara's press conference yesterday actually gave me a little bit of confidence. I liked a lot of the things that he said. The only criticism I'd have of the press conference is the fact it wasn't live and that there was a controlled room in terms of which questions were asked. I didn't like that, but in terms of what John Mara was saying, it's everything that you need to hear, and it was honest. He was honest, and I've never seen him so embarrassed. You saw his face. He looked really, really, really embarrassed. Like, he was humble to the fans. There was not even any underlying jabs or anything. It was like, I've got a lot to make it up to do. He basically said that. He's like, the fans have no reason to trust that I'm going to make the right decision, but I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make this right. And I like that, and I like the fact that he was very forthright. He did say this is the most embarrassing time that he's ever been involved with the organization, and this has been a lifetime involvement. So it really says it all. I fully trust that he's actually going to make the right decision now. And even when they were talking about the family thing, I think they were overdoing the family thing. I think the front and center of the giant disaster was Dave Gettleman. And Joe Judge was a little guy on the side. It was Dave Gettleman that really drove this disaster train right off a cliff. That's what he did. Chris Mara and all this stuff, yeah, it's not a great look. It is nepotism. But I don't honestly believe that Chris Mara has that much to do with the organization. Gettleman drove the train off the cliff. That's what he did, So I'm not overly concerned about the family aspect. I think that John Mara has trusted the wrong people. And this is the very first time that he's had a full clean sweep rebuild. I've never seen it in my time as a Giant fan. My whole life, I've never seen them do a clean sweep rebuild. The coach and the GM have to go because, especially in the modern NFL, you need your general manager and you need your head coach in sync. You can't have one inheriting the other, and you can't have one choosing the next one, because I think that's what Joe Judge wanted. He wanted to control who his next general manager was going to be. So if that was going to be Abrams, that's him just trying to protect his own butt. And he didn't earn anything, and in order to have that power, and so he had to go. He absolutely had to go. So you can never have your coach choosing the general manager unless your coach is won a lot and has a massive resume and has huge respect. But from everything I'm learning, the dressing room, the locker room, they weren't all in on Joe Judge. They certainly didn't like his press conference. From what I read, they were like, "What the heck is he talking about?" When he was begging, he was saying that players are begging him to come back, begging for them to come back and stuff like that. That was a lie. And the locker room knew it. So Joe Judge fired himself. He was at the 1 yard line. I said it in a previous podcast. He was in the 1 yard line, and he fumbled. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. It started with the quarterback throwing for negative yardage, and then him boasting about how well we played. I mean, that was embarrassing in the press conference. And then he still would have kept his job, but then we get into the 11-minute rant, and that was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. It was a meltdown, and it was a meltdown of his own insecurities. He was asked, why the fans who trust he's going to get this right, and he just basically went on this meltdown of his own insecurities, trying to prove that he's this fantastic coach, and it was embarrassing. And then he started throwing shade at Washington and Ron Rivera is a very, very good man. He's been through a lot, an excellent coach, and to throw shade at his, what he's running there is a terrible look. And then to throw shade at Pat Shurmur, again, a very good man. It didn't work out as a head coach, but he's a very good, respected coach. And throw shade at him as well. It's a terrible look. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the franchise. Embarrassing for John Mara. But he still would have kept his job, which is the funny thing. He probably still would have kept his job until we got into this final game. and he surrendered. And those second and third down, those quarterback sneaks on second and third down, second and 10, third and 9. That was essentially kneeling. It was basically a kneel. It was like it was victory formation. It was now the surrender formation. It was I've never seen it before, and that was infamous. It's made it all over the national news. It's made international news. It's unbelievable.
Wendy's, even the freaking fast food chain Wendy's is talking about it.
Oh my God.
That's how embarrassing
Aaron
it is.
Rodgers was talking about it, and a Pat McAfee show, he was talking about it. People are mocking the Giants everywhere. The whole world is mocking the Giants, and not just Giants, specifically Joe Judge. They have been absolutely barbecuing them and that surrender. I mean, that's going to be in the all-time worst play calls in Giant history. It probably, at the moment, it is. And in terms of the most embarrassing moments in Giant history, it's Joe Picharczyk fumble, and it's the and then of course the Dodge punt, and then now this. And I think those two are human error. This, he deliberately did it, which is even worse. He planned that. Oh, this is what I'm gonna do. And
he did it. The whole thing. My thing with that was he's essentially saying by him doing that, he is telling the whole world, I have zero confidence, even though we know the offense sucked, but he just flat out said it. My offense stinks. They cannot get 10 yards in 2 plays. They can't do it. So I'm just going to call 2 quarterback kneels, essentially, to play punt position. What were you going to do with that extra 2 yards for punt positioning? So none of that made sense. None of what he said made sense. And at that point, when that happened, and then his explanation, I'm like, he's got to go, right? Like, they can't keep him. And I'm like, that's insanity. That's a guy who's losing his mind. Like, you don't see coaches do that and then keep their job. Like, he has to be fired specifically for that. Forget anything else that's happened throughout his 2 years here. That move alone should have been enough to get him fired. There was nothing to play for, right? So why not just go all out? Like, what's the deal? If you don't get it and you have to punt from the 3 instead of the 7, who cares? At least go for it. Go for something. Try to get some yards. But he laid down. He laid an egg. Yeah. And like you said, he had it at the 1 yard line. He had his job at the 1 yard line. He called a couple of quarterback sneaks and moved backwards. That's what happened. And he got fired because of it. And I wanted him to be the guy. I think I speak for a lot of Giants fans when we bought into it last year, and for good reason. For the first time in a while, we had promise. Despite a 6-win season, the team was fighting. He was saying all the right things. But then, this is even before week 1, things were different this year. Yeah. We had 2 guys retire, 2 offensive and retire in training camp. We had Kelvin Benjamin, who we know is not necessarily a great player, but he came out and said, there's something up with this guy. And then... And then all of a sudden, you started to see it week after week, like, well, maybe he was just a product of there being a little less pressure because there was nobody in the crowds last year. There was a lot less eyes, and, even though everything was on TV, but maybe he was just lucky last year. The team kind of overachieved despite only winning 6 games. And I can only think of 3 games this year where they looked somewhat watchable. That was the Carolina game because we just flat out dominated. The Chiefs game, they were watchable because they almost won. If not for, I think another offsides call, whatever the hell it was that cost the game. But there was maybe other.
It was the Eli Penny, taunting call, and then of course Daniel Jones' stupid interception.
Right. But they put up a fight in that game. Yeah. That game was very similar to what we saw from them last year. And maybe the Saints game because they had that comeback and you're like, wow, that was exciting. So, but that's 3 out of 17 games where they looked watchable. Like they weren't even watchable during the Eagles game and they won that game. They looked terrible. Yeah. They couldn't win despite the defense getting you 5 takeaways. Like that's a bad team. It's a really bad team, and it's just every single week, and even John Mara said, things got worse, and the light at the end of the tunnel wasn't there, and they got to start over. and it has to be a young, up and coming person, like vice president or assistant GM kind of guy, and that's who we're interviewing. And I'm very excited.
Yeah.
And they got to have their choice at an offensive-minded head coach because that's how you win in today's NFL. Defense still wins you games and all that, but you're not winning games scoring 7 points a week. You're just not going to do it.
I'm really glad you brought up the offensive lineman thing because I was wondering at what point did you start to have questions about Joe Judge? Because I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, when did things start changing for me with Joe Judge? Because I remember when we first hired him, I was like, right, this is obviously a joke. This isn't real. We're not hiring a special teams coordinator with no experience, who's never even coached high school ball to be the head coach of the New York Football Giants over the base of a really good interview. I was like, this is going to be a total, complete disaster. And I was actually right. But then his press conference, and I was like, oh my God, this is phenomenal. This is everything I've ever dreamed of, right? And then he was actually decent last year, reasonably decent. Now, the skill level was really bad on the Giant football team. The skill level was terrible, especially offensively. Defensively, it was phenomenal because Patrick Graham is a genie of a defensive coordinator, so that's what carried us. But Joe Judge certainly had them fighting, even though the skill level wasn't very good, and I don't think the play calling was great, but he didn't have anything to do with any of that. So it was fine. It was fine. I was perfectly content with last year. This year, that was interesting when you brought up the fact that everybody started retiring. That was very strange. We'd sign somebody, they'd retire the next day. And I'm thinking, why is everybody retiring after one day? Are these guys signing one-day contracts and then retiring just so they can say they retired as Giant? I don't understand what's going on. But, you were still buying into the Joe Judge hype. So you're thinking, oh, man, he's a fighter. He's getting all these guys riled up and all this stuff. He's getting these guys fighting. I'm fine with that. And then we got into the games. And that's when things started to change. So for me, well, obviously week one, when the timeouts were wild, I remember in week one. And then, of course, he had the challenge. He threw the challenge flag on a non-challengeable play. And then he went, and that wasn't even, I remember when he did that, and he did the stupid timeouts. I said that verbally. I was like, what are you doing, Joe Judge? What is going on here? But then I didn't think too much of it. Then his press conference, and then he justified it. And he made it out like he knew the rules all along. That's just a lie. That's BS. I'm sorry, bro. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Is he kind of pulling the wool over our eyes a little bit? Because he seems to have an answer for everything. And then every week after that, he was defending things that were indefensible, all of his own accord. Like I was saying all year, was like his timeouts this is not like normal. Like this is not even just kind of rookie mistakes. These are disastrous mistakes that are costing us games. And then he's justifying these terrible timeouts. And then he blamed the headsets. And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute. He's not accountable for anything right now. And then we got to midway through the year, and then he fired Garrett. And he was kind of riding on the fact that the whole Giant fan base was wanting Garrett out, right? And they were all jumping all over him. I wasn't on that train. I wanted Garrett fired at the end of the year or the start of the year. I didn't want him fired in the middle of the year. I just thought it was a terrible look, and I just thought it was scapegoating. And I was right about that. I just didn't like the look of it. I didn't think it was going to make that much difference, And I thought that Freddie Kitchens, I don't think he's that much of an upgrade over Jason Garrett, and so it proved. He certainly wasn't. In fact, he made things worse. But what I didn't like about the firing was it was a scapegoat again. It was another scapegoat, because he scapegoated the offensive line coach the year before. And then he's scapegoating the offensive coordinator. I'm thinking, no, he's scapegoating because he's the one that's been making these terrible mistakes all year long. Is really him. He's been doing a terrible job. And I just didn't like it. And then every time he'd say so in the press conference, he's like, oh, I'm the one that I look at myself first in the mirror and all this stuff. I was like, no, you don't. You're blaming everybody else, bro. Everybody else is the fault, not you. And then, and then we got to the point where Daniel Jones get hurt. And then that was his convenient excuse. And I thought the Giants would use that as a convenient excuse, and they would have. But then they melted down beyond all recognition. They suddenly went from a very bad football team under Daniel Jones to a high school team that's just really bad, like Bad News Bears style high school team that aren't even organized. They're not even an organized football team. They're just throwing the ball around, just don't really know what they're doing. That's what suddenly they descended from. You know, from a really bad team just to not even a football team, not even a college team, high school level team. And then he melted down. That's what happened.
You're right about that. And the thing with the headset, that's really where it kind of started for me. Yeah. I'm like, you're starting to see some cracks in his armor here because he always, like you said, he always had an answer. And last year you backed it up because the team was fighting despite being worse on paper than we are this year. Yeah. And like for him to blame the headsets when there was no evidence of it and the league said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. They never told us about it. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like this is like, this is something you would read on The Onion. Like this has got to be a fake story, right? And no, he was blaming the headsets. And I was just like, what are we doing here? Like, this is what we've come to now, that we're blaming headsets for the team's issues. Like, and that he had no use of the timeouts. He didn't know how to use them. He doesn't know how to throw a challenge flag. I'm like, this guy is in over his head. He pulled the ruse on us. You know, the hoodwink, bamboozled, led astray, run amok, and flat out deceived. That's what he did to us. And I was like, it's unbelievable that the team has regressed the way it did. And not just the team, everybody, the coaches regressed. Every single part of this team got worse this year when it was better on paper. And we didn't upgrade the offensive line at all. But to be fair, we did lose our starting left guard and our starting center within like the first few weeks of the season. So I want to give a little, and then guys retired as well. But still, they didn't do anything in the offseason to try to improve the line, at least the depth. They had to make 2 desperate trades before the season started and got 2 backups to try to fill needs on the offensive line. And I don't want to keep blaming the offensive line because, again, we talked about it before, the Bengals are doing just fine with a not-so-good offensive line. Same with the Chargers. They didn't make the playoffs this year, but they came very, very close. And, so I just – everything regressed except for like 2 players. And that's not something you see every day. For an entire team, top to bottom, ownership, the GM, the assistant GM, the player personnel guy, the head coach, to the final coordinator on the roster, everybody got worse. And it starts with the GM, like you said, but I think a lot of it has to do with John Mara because he brought in Gettleman because he was a familiar face. You know, they had a chance to do that reset. After the McAdoo fiasco, they had a chance to go, okay, look, we're in a bad cap situation. Let's get a fresh face in here, a fresh head coach, and let's do this rebuild correctly. Instead, they brought in Gettleman because he said, no, I can build you a winner around Eli Manning, despite Eli Manning being at the tail end of his career. Yeah. And Mara said, yeah, go for it. And they had a chance to do it a few years ago. They didn't do it. So now they're finally doing it. I'm hoping it works out. I don't have any reason to believe it won't work out because they're doing something that we haven't seen them do in like 20 years. So 20 plus years. So I'm glad it's finally happening. But yeah, with Judge, it's just so weird because he didn't do any of these things last year. Like the timeout stuff, you know, the clock management wasn't great, but he got worse. Yeah, he regressed. Like that's the perfect word. And it was a glaring regression from him. Like everything he did was worse. His press conferences were worse. His excuses were worse. And I'm like, this guy is a lunatic. Like everything he's saying is like contradicting himself from the week before. So it was a necessary change. I'm glad they're doing it. And it's a shame at the same time because I really wanted it to work out. You know,
I just think he's a sensational salesman. I think he went into that interview and he did his homework and he gave John Mara and gave Dave Gettleman everything that they could possibly dream of hearing. This whole punch you in the mouth, old school, we're going to fight to the end. And
I think it was an expert sales pitch. I think he basically told the organization everything he wanted to hear because they said he was going to base his coaching style on Tom Coughlin and Bill Parcells. I mean, those are the two heroes of the organization, and I think that basically got his foot in the door. Now they obviously did do their homework on him and stuff like that, and it was obviously sold to him by Saban and of course Belichick. But I honestly think that he just pulled off the greatest interview that's ever been seen, and then he then proceeded to sell to us. And his press conference was his sales pitch, and it worked. And it only worked to the point where once it started becoming quite clear that there was things that were quite untrue, especially the whole we're going at you for 60 minutes and punching you in the mouth. No, what we're actually going to do is we're going to surrender and we're going to kneel. And that's
Not even 30 minutes in.
Exactly. That's what happened, man. So I don't want to pile on Joe Judge. It is what it is. From all I hear, he's a very good guy. I think certainly in the locker room, a lot of people really, really liked him. He was a really good guy. Logan Ryan really liked him a lot. There's a lot of guys that really appreciated him. And certainly I thought he was going to be a really good coach. It just didn't work out. I think a lot of it was he just flat out was not ready to be a head coach of the New York Giants. He never should have been. He never should have been put in that position. He needed more experience. He should have gone to Mississippi State and gotten some coaching experience there, and then came to us afterwards. Because I think there's a coach in there, but at the moment, there's a lot of bravado and a lot of BS salesman stuff that I just did not like, and I had to go. He had to go. So we're now getting a fresh start. So so that's where we're at. Then now we're going to have a look at these new GM candidates. Is there any ones of the list of who we're interviewing that you quite like?
For me, out of the guys we've interviewed so far, I really like Joe Schoen from Buffalo. Yeah, I think he'd be a perfect choice. Also, I love Poles from Kansas City. I think that would be a really good hire. These are two young guys that have a lot of experience in their role already where they are, and they could both bring in, assuming they want to bring in one of their guys for head coach. So we'd have a choice. If we get Poles, maybe he brings in Eric Bieniemy as the head coach. And if it was Joe Schoen, we can have a shot at getting Brian Daboll, both offensive coordinators for really good offensive teams. And I really want an offensive-minded head coach. That's what I think the Giants need. And I think that if you have a GM who's familiar with a coach and they both have a vision of how they want to build this team, I think that's the way you have to go. But I do like everyone on the list that we've interviewed so far, the dudes from Arizona as well, Harris and Wilson. I don't think there's really a bad choice there, and that's a good sign because we hired Gettleman so quickly when we made that decision because he was a familiar face. Now we're going out of the organization, guys who we don't have any ties to, and guys with fresh ideas and a new vision of how to build this team back up to where we expect it to be. So I would put, if I had to pick one from that group, probably Joe Schoen, but I'm really liking it. Changes every time they put out all the stuff when they interview each guy. But I really like Poles as well, so I don't think there's really a bad choice here with anyone that they've interviewed so far. But I've had Schoen on my list for a while, so I'm gonna stick with it. That's the guy I probably would pick as the one I want the most. But again, I'd be okay with any one of these.
Well, Joe Schoen's certainly the most sought after name. A lot of teams really respect him. He's really respected. So he has to be at the top of our list. He had his interview already. From what I hear, it went pretty damn well. So that's a name to look out for. Another name that's not been mentioned that we should look out for is Joe Hortz of Baltimore. He's highly rated too. And he could bring Wink Martindale with him, and I like Wink Martindale. I think that when we interviewed him the last time, he was actually my choice along with Bieniemy. He was one of the two. So those were the two guys that I really wanted. So we still could get one of the two, because say we went the Ryan Poles route, as you mentioned, to Kansas City, he could bring Bieniemy with him. As you say, Sean and Brian Daboll is an automatic connection. You can totally see that. And I have no problem with the general manager bringing in his guy. I don't have a problem with that, because that means that they're in sync. I don't have a problem with that. I know that maybe some people might, because we want to have a full, thorough head coaching search. But I do think that in the modern NFL, you need your general manager to be fully trusting who his head coach is going to be, so they're in sync and making be in the same wavelength in terms of drafting and recruitment and how they go about things. So that's what I'm thinking. Another name that we could possibly bring up is Adam Peters, San Francisco. He's another guy who's really good. As you say, there's not a wrong answer here, man. I don't know too much about the Arizona guys that we've interviewed too much, but Harris, whatever. But I know a lot about Schoen and Horitz and Adam Peters. Those are guys that are really highly rated. And then, of course, there's Ryan Poles as well. Kansas City. You can't go wrong with Kansas City. They've drafted excellently. Got a heck of an organization there. So there's really not all these. Another good thing is the top four candidates. We would probably say is Peters, Schoen, Poles, and Horace, or even Arizona. These are all winning organizations. All of them are winning organizations. I know Baltimore didn't make the playoffs, but that's just because Lamar Jackson got hurt. If Lamar Jackson didn't get hurt, Baltimore would be in the playoffs, so there wouldn't be any question about it. So those are all really good organizations, all really well respected. They've all developed excellently, and I think those are the best candidates that I can find.
No, you're absolutely right. They're going for winning organizations, and they're going for guys that are learning under good GMs.
Yeah.
And they have a lot to offer if they get that promotion to the GM position for another team. They can be like, look, I learned a lot under so-and-so, and I have this idea of how I can build this team. That's why it was so important that they made the change at head coach, because like I said earlier, you limit your choices if you keep Judge. Now you have to find someone who's going to work with Judge and have that same vision as him. So now, if it's a new GM, if it's Poles and his guy is Bieniemy, okay, that means that they've talked about this before. What would happen if I got hired as GM and I brought you in as my head coach? Now there's dialogue that's already happened. They can bring that to the organization. We want this guy on our staff. We want this guy on our staff. We want to get this player on our offense, blah, blah, blah. And then, boom, there's a plan in place. Mm-hmm. And they're already more in sync than our last GM head coach combo was, because they've been together and they've already cleared. And if they join the Giants together from another organization, that means they've already had this conversation. So they're in sync. Gettleman was never in sync with Judge, because they weren't hired together.
Exactly.
And even Gettleman and Shermer, they were hired together, but it's like Gettleman was with Carolina and he failed with Carolina, and Pat Shermer was apparently a quarterback guru after one good year with Case Keenum. So it was just like, are they really going to be in sync with each other? And they weren't, and it was clear as day that they weren't. And I'm just glad that now we're finally going to a winning organization, going for a guy who hasn't had the job yet. We're going to get a rookie GM, which is fine, because that means he's learned a lot. He's worked his way up the ranks of a good organization that's won, and he's going to bring that to us because we need it desperately. So that's what I'm most excited for. And again, the list that you just put off there, it's all good options, every single one of them. And I hope I don't really think there's a bad choice. Like I said, I can't find any negative for any of these choices.
And that's what's so exciting. Like there's a no-lose proposition here. Remember our list of GM candidates and then our list of head coaching candidates. We got the last ones that I could possibly want I didn't want Dave Gettleman back, and then we hired him. I was more excited about the other guys that we were interviewing, but we ended up going with Dave Gettleman. And then, of all the list of the head coaches, the last one I wanted was Joe Judge, because I just didn't think he was ready. And then, now there's not really a black sheep in this family. There's some really good candidates, and it's smart. They're smart, young, and they're ambitious, and that's what you want. And they're smart. Smart is the key. And Dave Gettleman was pompous. He was filled with his own self-aggrandizement. He thought no one could touch him. He treated people badly. He treated scouts badly, from what I hear. We already heard how he treats players that he's done with. Just cast them aside. He doesn't build relationships. He's not a guy that builds relationships. You need your general manager to build relationships. You just have to, especially in the modern world. But Gettleman wasn't like that, and he was full of himself. Fans weren't allowed to approach him. Media never approached him, and he was just too good for all that stuff. And then he was too good for analytics. He mocked analytics, and that's not a look. It's not a good look. It just shows that the Giants were making a laughingstock out of themselves. And the way that he was so pompous about picking Daniel Jones. It was just sort of like, haha, yeah, I'm the smartest guy in the room, was basically what he said. It was just kind of a lot of arrogance. And then, the Saquon stuff, he's touched by the hand of God and things like that. And, he's already a gold jacket guy. I mean, you're already setting both of them up for failure. And those are your two prize picks. Saquon has to work and Daniel Jones has to work. But you're kind of setting both up to fail, because if Saquon Barkley isn't the gold jacket, touched by the hand of God guy, and he may even just be very good, he's already set him up for failure, because he already put him up on this pedestal, right? But that was just to excuse the fact that he chose running back second overall, which you just can't do, especially not in the modern day. And then Daniel Jones, he obviously reached. Everyone knows he reached, but he was so pompous and arrogant. He's like, how dare anybody ask me questions? I've won all this, and I've done this, and I've done this. No one else has done this stuff. And it was like unapproachable, arrogant, and that is just a no-no. It would only work if we win a Super Bowl with that. But he was never going to do that, man. People did not like him that much. And he was also, record-wise, he's also the worst general manager in the modern National Football League. He just absolutely is. He's one of the worst general managers ever in modern times. And it's just an embarrassing look. So glad he's gone. It was terrible that he was allowed to retire. What are your thoughts on the fact that he was just allowed to retire like that?
I think I don't want to say that it was because of what he's been through, like personally. He had the battle with cancer and all that, and they didn't want to fire him. But I have a bad feeling, well, not really a bad feeling, but I have a feeling it had to do with that. Because if we're going off of his football resume, he had no reason to be able to walk into the sunset and retire. No. He had absolutely no reason to be allowed to do that. They fired Jerry Reese mid-season after, as bad as he was at the end of his tenure. Reese did win two Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Maybe more responsible for one of them, because I think as good as 11 was, that team kind of lucked into the playoffs at least. However, he does have Super Bowls on his resume, and he was fired mid-season. And Dave Gettleman, as bad as things were for every single year under him, was able to kind of ride off into the sunset and be like, yeah, I retired. So that's where I think it was more so of a, look, we like you. We're not going to have that you were fired label to end your career, because he's not getting another job. We know that for a fact. He was never getting another job after this. He failed with Carolina. I don't care what anyone says. He got to a Super Bowl, but he failed with Carolina. Look at where the team is. They had to restart because of what Dave Gettleman built. So, I think at this point, it's just they didn't want to have him be fired again to end his career. He was with us for that 2011 and 2007 Super Bowl, as I believe, as well. So they're like, look, you did some stuff for us in the past, so we're just going to let you have this. But he certainly didn't deserve it during his time as GM. If you're going based off of his time as Giants GM, he should have been fired 3 years ago. But then that's just how they did it. So
I mean, he didn't even allow fans to, like, I know the media asked him questions, Dave Gettleman questions on Sunday, and he just ignored them. He just walked right past them. That's how he treated people. He was just too good for it. And I know that he had a lot of personal battles, and I was very upset when I found out that he had cancer, because I was fully behind him rebuilding the organization. It just didn't work out. But relationships matter, and he did not do enough of that. He certainly didn't do anything to have the fans feel like there was a voice or anything like that. So that I certainly will not lose any sleep with him gone. It's a huge, huge relief, because now we're going to move in the right direction. So I like what you were bringing up there about the fact that now we're going to have a general manager and head coach in sync, because the whole reason why you can't just keep one guy and fire the other, which we were doing before, the half-assed thing. The reason why you can't do that is because you're always going to have one of them working across purposes, right? So when Tom Coughlin was fired, we kept Jerry Reese, and then we brought in Ben McAdoo. Jerry Reese was working across purposes from Ben McAdoo. Ben McAdoo obviously was just new, and he's just getting started. Jerry Reese is trying to save his job, and he spent a fortune in free agency, which crippled us. Right. Then we obviously went and repeated the same mistake again with then firing, the whole line, then bringing in Dave Gettleman. Right. And then Dave Gettleman started working at cross purposes when we fired Pat Shurmur. Right. And then, and then he's now spent a fortune in free agency with Joe Judge in order to save his job. Right. And then Joe Judge was working at cross purposes from Dave Gettleman, because Joe Judge knew that Gettleman was going to retire. So then Joe Judge is trying to get more power within the organization, and he's trying to pick the next GM, and he wants to be the main guy, right? And so you're already kind of working in cross purposes, and that's just, and even at the end of the tenure between Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin, Jerry Reese was working in cross purposes from Tom Coughlin. And it basically got him fired. So that's why you have to always have a clean sweep. If you're going to fire one, you have to fire the other, unless that general manager has, an impeccable resume and there was a real reason to fire just the head coach. But otherwise, you kind of have to have a clean sweep. So we finally wised up, because you can't just keep repeating the same mistakes and expecting a different result, as we all know that saying. So that's what I'm excited about. We're not seeking advice from within, and we're listening to the fan base, which is unbelievable. John Mara's listening to the fan base, and he's got a list of exciting candidates, no-lose candidates, and then we move on to the head coach search pretty soon. I'm really excited to see who we're going to hire general manager. I was going to ask you a question, though. What do you think about the possibility of hiring Brian Flores as head coach?
I'll make this quick before we wrap it up. I think it's a travesty that he got fired.
It is, yeah.
Because he did really well for Miami. They were a team that overachieved, in my opinion. They have a good roster, solid. Probably not a playoff caliber roster, but he got them very close 2 years in a row. I mean, they won 10 games last year, if I'm not mistaken, and they missed the playoffs. So clearly they're doing something right. And I don't know why they would fire him. But if he were to be a GM's top choice, even if it was a Kansas City guy, or if it was, if it was one of those guys, even if they said, I want Flores, I'd be on board with it. Because he's had success. He's a former Belichick guy, but he was able to do things with a Dolphins team that probably shouldn't have won as many games as they did. So I would definitely give him a shot. If that was the choice, I wouldn't be mad. However, I I don't think he's going to be our top choice. I think they're going to go more offensive minded, but I would certainly welcome it if that was the decision. If they go with Flores as the head coach, that's fine with me personally. I just don't think they're going to go with that.
Yeah,
as a choice. Yeah,
I love Flores. He's got a 4-2 record against Belichick, so anyone's got a winning record against Bill Belichick is a darn good coach, as far as I'm concerned. He's a New York guy. He's from Brooklyn. Brought up a Giant fan. I think that's going to win him favor within the organization. John Mara loves guys that are Giant fans. So you could see him getting an interview. And I'd welcome him, man. He's got experience, and he did a heck of a job with Miami. And the reason why he got fired is purely just because of the fact he just didn't get on with the general manager and the ownership. And Miami, I don't really like their front office. He wanted Herbert, for instance, and then they wanted to, and then these kind of things. And that relationship's not going to work, So he had to go, I assume, but he didn't deserve to. He did a heck of a job. And the fact that the whole league has reacted to the fact he was fired, sort of like, what the heck are the Dolphins doing? It's a pretty good indicator that he's a heck of a coach. So he'd be one of my best targets. But I do understand what you're saying about an offensive mind. The reason why I say that is because we've got so little maneuverability in the cap that our best assets are offensive weapons, right? Obviously, we're ideally they probably want to try and get something out of Saquon because although you'd save $7 million in the cap by cutting him, you probably don't want to do that yet. You want to get something out of him, even if he's a third down back. You know what I mean? You want something. Then you got Kadarius Toney, who's got a lot of upside if he can stay on the field, which is obviously no guarantee. But, you got that as a weapon. He's somebody that a really good offensive mind could develop. And then you've got Kenny Goliday, who basically has been one of the worst free agent signings of all time. But I don't know if that was all a lot to do with Kenny Goliday. I think a lot to do with the situation that he was in. So, he's uncuttable unless we trade him, but I don't really know. It's going to cost us a lot of dead cap money. So we're surely on the hook for him at least one more year. So you want something out of Goliday. And then you want someone who's going to develop a quarterback, whether it's Daniel Jones or whether it's the next quarterback. It will be the next quarterback because I don't see the new general manager and head coach being all in on Daniel Jones, certainly not long term. So you do want an offensive mind. Is there one that jumps out at you? Like, what about, for instance, the Patriots offensive coordinator, McDaniels? Would you say that or what?
I mean, we've already seen that before, and it didn't work out too well. Yeah. I mean, when he left Brady, it was clear that he needed Brady, but he's having success with Mac Jones. That's because Mac Jones is a good quarterback. I really like Bieniemy a lot because he has the best quarterback in the NFL to work with, or one of the best. You can argue that it might not be him this year, but Dable is a great choice because what he was able to do with Josh Allen. I know there was other people that were involved in that, but to me, it's Dable or Bieniemy simply because of the quarterback play. But that's actually a good conversation to have about Daniel Jones for a future episode because we can go on for a lot longer talking about that. But we have already gone on for quite some time today talking about Judge and the GM. But let us know what you guys think in the comments. Who do you want as the GM and head coach? What are your thoughts on Joe Judge? If there's any positive thoughts, please put them in the comments. And yes, be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe. And we'll see you guys next time. Let's go Giants.
Let's go Giants.